Recently on the channel, we were talking about tabletop terrain for our gaming, and of course I mentioned the effects that terrain can have on our strategy and tactics. Now, there are lots of real life historical examples of this, of course. We can think of the battles of Issus, of Tewkesbury, of Porto. We can think of campaigns like Operation Market Garden in the Second World War. And even if we look into fantasy, we can look at things like the Fords of Eisen, not to be confused with Fords of Dagenham, of course. So, what do all these battles, all these encounters have in common? Yes, today on Dragon's Teeth, we're going to be talking about rivers. So I'm sure we've all made rivers for our terrain. The last lot I made were your typical cardboard affair, curves and straight parts cut out of a cardboard box with some filler put in on the sides to build up banks, then painted bluey green or greeny blue, etc, etc. So they kind of look okay, but there's always been a couple of issues with rivers for me on tabletops. One is the way they sit on the table, and you have to build up the banks around the river in order to get that impression of the river being there. Now, you can get around this, of course, if you're using tiles, because you can dig into the tiles, so that gives you a much more realistic look. Downside with that, of course, is you need a lot of tiles. I don't really have space to store a lot of tiles, and if they're being transported about a lot, then of course they're quite fragile as well. If you've got somewhere you can store them, as we have down at the Gladiators, then that's great. The only transport is they're being taken in and out of the box. So tiles look good, but you still have that issue of tiles being joined together. You get these lines. And the same for any river piece that you lay on top of the table, you're going to get joins. If you've got a 25mm sort of river piece, it may be, I don't know, 10 inches wide or something like that, maybe a foot long, so you might have a few of those going across the table. So I've always been interested in other options for building a good river, and I came across this chap on YouTube, this channel. The name of the channel is Knights of Dice, and I think the guy is from Australia. Now, I'm not sure how active he is at the moment, because the actual clip is a couple of years old. There is a website link on there, so I'll put that in the notes below. And he says he got this idea from a Facebook post, which he put the link up for, but that link has long since gone. It's long since disappeared. Now, the idea for this method is, rather than using cardboard or building something up, what we use is a piece of plastic sheet, and we basically paint the underside of it. So when we turn it over, we've got a very flat surface that sits, it's still not sinking into the table, but it sits very flat on it. But you've got this nice shiny watery effect from the plastic. This looked great to me for a couple of reasons. One, that plastic, as I said, gives that nice watery effect without having to use resin or lots of gloss varnish or anything else. But with this river being plastic, you can make a whole length of it. You could potentially have a 6-foot long river, and because it's plastic, you can roll it up. Hopefully in doing so, none of the paint comes off, but that's what we're going to find out today. So yeah, I'm going to have a go at making one of these rivers. Now, he uses a brand name in the clip that he put up, so I had a little look round, and what I found is something that I think is the equivalent. I'll put the link up to that in the notes below as well. And these are made as sort of table covers, protective table covers. There were some other types as well. There was like a sticky translucent plastic that you put over things to protect them. But this, in terms of thickness and in terms of look and in terms of size, looked to be the best bet for me, because you do get a fair size of it, and considering I'm working in 10mm, this should be enough to give me plenty of rivers, lakes, marshes, maybe even the edge of an ocean, who knows. So let's get on with it. So this is our plastic sheet. I'm not sure of the exact thickness of that. As I say, I'll put the link up to the, I think it was Amazon I got it through, but I'm sure you can get hold of these very easily, either online or through your local homeware shop. I'm not going to mention B&M again. Oops, I just did. But this is about 6 foot long and about 4 foot across, so more than enough for my needs. The one that the guy used in his YouTube video seemed a lot thinner than this. It was actually sticking to itself. It was almost like cling film, but that worked well enough. This feels a little bit thicker. So that's my material. Now, what size do I want my rivers? Let's use a sheet of paper to start, because that's going to be a lot clearer to see. So I'm thinking everything in Fantastic Battles works off the base size, which is 40mm by 40mm. This is half a unit of skeleton warriors. So let's start with 40mm then. If we think that our river is going to be 40mm wide, that will give us this sort of width. So there's our unit, and I'd say that was good. That would be like maybe a large stream or a smallish river. If we go up to 80mm, so that now is 2 base widths. That's a considerably larger river. That to me now looks more something like not a major river like the River Thames or that kind of thing, but maybe the River Ouse at certain points around here. This one you might be able to ford. This one you're definitely going to need a bridge or some type of crossing. So we could potentially get wider than that, you know. If we're going for sort of Rhine scale, then I'm guessing, you know, the river's probably going to take up a quarter of the table. I don't really see that as being any use. And I think, as I mentioned before, to some extent, your terrain pieces on the tabletop are representational, because if you have everything in scale, then you're going to need a lot bigger table. We're going to need a bigger table. Now, the other option, if I don't want to worry too much about the base size as my sort of standard, I might go somewhere between the two. So let's look at a 60mm. So that is more that size. And again, that gives us something substantial looking on the table. It's not going to take up too much space, because what I also have to think is it's no good having rivers unless you're going to have bridges as well. So what size bridges am I going to have to buy or construct in order to put across those as well? So I think I'm going to go mostly for 60mm. I might at some point do 80mm, slightly wider rivers, and I will make up some 40mm as well, maybe even a little bit smaller to represent streams. Now, of course, the other thing is, with that size there, that'll be my maximum. So it could well be, of course, that the river's going to take more this kind of shape. It's not going to be such an even straight line. But as long as I'm keeping pretty much within those boundaries, then that gives the river a sort of cohesive look. I know rivers do vary in size, of course, as they progress from spring down to the sea, but you know, that's another scale altogether. So potentially, if we imagine this is our tabletop, and let's say this is a 6x4 table, which is a you know, pretty average size, potentially with the size of the sheet I've got here, I can make a 4 foot long river in one piece. So I could have my river doing something like this. And that's all one piece that I roll up and then just lay it on the tabletop, and we can add in our bridges. I'll talk about some ideas for fords later on, because I've had an idea or two about that. Of course, the downside with that is we've got the same shape river every time. So another option I might do is do some sections. So I might do a section like this. I might do a section like this, and so on and so on. So then, of course, I can fit these together. Now, hopefully with this material, there is going to be a join there, but I don't think it's going to be as noticeable as when you have your cardboard pieces put together. It's the same with roads, right? You know, the table gets knocked a little bit and you get these, what to me are unsightly joins. And I know there's no perfect answer to any of this stuff, short of having a sort of permanent model railway type layout. But then, of course, you're fighting the same terrain every time. So it's always getting this balance between what looks good and what is functional. So I think I might do one big river just to test that out. Then I shall do some sort of maybe 2 sections to go across. The other thing I'm going to look at doing, because I'm sure they'll play a part in the campaign we're using these for as well, are some small lakes and some marshes as well. I'll have a go, I'll see if I can make up some marshy areas. Now for those in particular, I've got to leave some space to put the figures on, to put the bases on. So I'm not sure how I'm going to work those yet, but that's something that I think with this plastic we'll get that nice shiny effect. So that's the plan, and of course the other thing with this, it's going to be very easy to cut. I'm not sure how easy it's going to be to mark. Oh right, okay, we can get a mark. I'm not sure if that's going to wipe off or not. That might be an issue. But I thought what I'd do first, well, I can go one of 2 ways. I can cut all my pieces out and then paint them. But what I thought I might try is I'm going to cut this into maybe 3 sections just so I can manage it a bit better. And I'm going to apply the paint first and then cut the pieces out. So of course I'm going to mostly use blue, and yes, we all know that rivers aren't really blue. They tend to be greeny, grey, browny depending, you know, where you are in the world. But as long as it's not bright blue, I think blue gives a representation everyone can clearly see it's meant to be a river. So I'll do blue with some green mixed in as well, and of course I don't want it to be too even. So I'm going to get some acrylic paint. Now for this I'm just using the cheap poster paint type stuff. I'm certainly not using my speed paints or anything like that. I suppose you could airbrush as well. That might be an option for this, but I'm not going to do that now. So cheap acrylic paints, and I'm basically going to put a bluey green wash over these sections of plastic. So I've cut that big sheet into sort of 4 strips just to make things a little easier to handle. And again, with the width of river I'm using, you know, even just one of these strips is going to give me as much as I need, certainly for the short term anyway. I've got just made a little measuring stick there. So of course the side or the width is not uniform throughout, but if I'm doing any join sections or end sections, I want to make sure they're the same width so they fit together easily. And as I said, the paints I'm using are just your standard. These are Hobbycraft acrylic paints, pretty cheap. I've got a dark blue, a light blue, a green, and if I want to muddy things up a bit, I've got a sort of brownish one there. So I'm just going to have a mix of those, see how they turn out. For application, I've got a brush. I also might use some sponges as well, just to mix in. I've got no idea how these paints are going to go on this surface. Both sides seem to be the same, by the way. I don't think that's going to make any difference. And for mixing, this is it's the lid off a Ferrero Rocher box of chocolates that my wife got for Christmas. Some of the chocolates are still left, but she kindly donated the lid for this project. So first things first, I'm going to whack some paints in here, add some water in, and I'm just going to start painting along the width of the strip, let that dry, cut them out and see how they look. Alright, so the first thing I discovered is don't put any water in. I thought I might need to thin these paints down a little bit, but this stuff is obviously quite water resistant, and so that just doesn't really let the paint apply it very well. So what I'm finding is that the brush is the best way to apply. The sponge was useless, it just spread the paint far too thin. And what I'm working is getting quite a lot of paint on the brush and keeping the brush across this way, the width, just dolloping bits of paint on. I'm just mixing in the palette here really, just to get that constant sort of variation in tone. And then what I'm finding is if I let that just dry for a little bit, and of course in the meantime I can be working further up, then I can come back to that and I can just do some longer brush strokes, and that's just mixing in and settling in nicely. And of course the advantage of having the white paper underneath, I thought at first that wasn't a good thing because I'm having trouble seeing the edge of the plastic, but having that white paper underneath shows up any little gaps quite clearly. So once that first layer has dried, I'll go back over and just fill in over any little gaps that I've got. And I've had a quick peek underneath. Let's see if I can just turn this corner over. I don't know if you can see there, that's starting to take shape quite nicely. So yeah, I'm going to do I might as well do the rest of this sheet pretty much as I've started on that, and then we'll get on to cutting out. The next morning then, and the good news is that the paint has dried. I think there might be one or two sort of slightly wet patches still where the paint was really thick, but I've got enough here to work with. So this is the other side. That's not looking too bad for a first attempt. It's kind of like a weird abstract painting, isn't it, really? I've got my measuring stick just to make sure I'm not going too narrow or too wide, and I'm going to cut out a couple of nice curves and use the full length, so we should end up with a 4-foot river. There's the piece cut out then. That's a 4-foot length of river. It does look like in parts where I've cut the curves it's not particularly laying flat, but I'm thinking once we get our terrain in along the edge, then that's going to keep that flattened down on the table. I'm not sure what terrain we'll be using today, but I will be making up some trees and other bits and pieces to line the river here. But overall, for a first attempt, that's not looking too bad. And this is what it looks like on the table. So as you can see, I was right, I've got those slight raises there. I think that's just where the curves are cut and the plastic won't go flat. Also, where this big sheet had been folded, there were some quite heavy fold marks. So next time I'm going to cut the length out and then paint after. That will hopefully give me a chance to get the piece totally flattened out, get rid of those folds. There's a lake I made as well. I cut out a few lakes and also a couple of fords to cross the river. I'll put up how I made those in another video. But yeah, in order to get it flat here, we put some blue tack underneath, which worked. It kept everything nice and flat, but when we took the blue tack off, the paint unfortunately came with it. So cut out the strip first next time, then paint it, and also varnish the paint as well to protect it. But overall, as I say, for a first attempt, that's looking pretty good. I like the shiny effect. I like the fact that it's flat against the table, and once we get some nice scenery along the banks, then I think these will look really good. That's it for today. I hope you found that useful. If you've tried something similar, then please do let me know. If you've got any other ideas for making a river that sits on the table but still looks rivery, doesn't look too cardboardy or have too many sections, then I'd be interested to hear your solution to that as well. So thanks to Knights of Dice for that top tip. Thanks to you for watching today. Thanks to everyone who sent in messages, by the way, and comments on the channel. Much appreciated and very helpful. And as always, if you haven't already, please do like, share and subscribe. I'll see you next time.